Dolly, it's so great to reconnect again today. We spent a great afternoon together at NYU a few years back, so I'm excited to talk again
Yeah,
today.
yeah, come on back.
Oh, I'd love to. We just love New York City and hope to be out there again soon. You've had an excellent career, Dolly, and as you think back on the lessons you've learned from your research, what lessons would you most like to pass on to others?
Mm. I love the question. I love this idea of thinking about what to share. Um, I think the thing that's been most useful for me now, and I think will continue to be sort of in my future self and hopefully my children and the way I'm raising them, is this idea of thinking about what a good person is and letting go of the notion of a good person being this like static entity, which is funny to think of as a parent because I think before this research, I would have been like, oh, I want to raise good people. But I think now I'm more oriented towards I want to raise kids who are equipped to to take feedback when they are told by others that they haven't lived up to a good person standard, like they've said something that they didn't intend to be racist, that is racist, or they've cut a corner thinking it was no big deal, but it is a big deal. And like to be equipped to accept that feedback, learn from it, grow from it, and do better the next time. Um, a lot of which, the umbrella term that Molly Kern, Max Beserman, Mazreen Banaji, and I have put out in our work is bounded ethicality. The idea that just like the human brain has limitations on how fast it can process information, how much information it can store, that affect the quality of our decision making. So we end up, more likely to buy the cereal at eye level than the cereal that we have to bend over and get or look up to get, even though that might actually be the cereal we want. Uh, just like bounded rationality predicts that kind of like systematic and predictable limitation in our decision making. Bounded ethicality predicts similar limitations in our ethical decision making. And I think I've found that helpful. It's liberating because it means that you don't feel like, oh my God, I got something wrong. I must be the most horrible person in the world. You think, oh my gosh, I got something wrong. I must be human. But ideally, we don't let ourselves off the hook at that point and be like, oh, I must be human, throw up my hands. It's, I must be human. I also, as a human being, can do better and can grow. And that's sort of the path that I've tried to pivot towards based off of my research. And I think others have found useful as well.
Yeah, what has most surprised you about this research into bounded ethicality?
I guess it's I think one of the things is like this isn't my research personally, but my research builds off of the work on moral identity. Um, and and that research shows that by and large, most people, or many people, I should say, do care about feeling like a good person, seeing themselves as a good person, being seen as a good person. What tends to vary is how we define good person. And that's kind of interesting to me that like, and I'm not sure I would have predicted it, that, your white supremacist sees himself as a good person and your Nazi sees himself as a good person. And that just on average, most people see themselves as good people and care about that identity. I found that kind of surprising.
Yeah, really interesting. It reminds me of the book How to Win Friends and Influence People. And
Oh
it's
yeah.
talking about, like murderers and hardened criminals and notorious criminals and, talking about how all they wanted to do was just provide the nicer things in life to people. And,
Yeah.
I'm just live the existence of a hunted man for just trying to make the world a better place while they're murdering people.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I mean, it's really fascinating. Like it's, the human mind is incredibly malleable. Like we can sort of make almost anything kind of fit
Yeah.
if we are motivated enough to do it. And so yeah, I think just kind of that, like it's psychology 101 really, but when applied in this domain that's so charged around ethics and how we treat people, it kind of takes on this extra gravity.
So how can people safeguard themselves against these sort of interpretations that, they are ethical when in fact they're not?
Yeah. Well, it seems like the best way to safeguard ourselves, and this includes things like unconscious bias, is to have systems that help save. It's not for us to safeguard ourselves, it's to have systems safeguard us. And so, um, it works in reverse, that a lot of like biases, for example, perpetuate because of systems, not because we're individually making the decision to be biased time and time again, but because systems we're part of and that we're not actively undoing are perpetuating the bias. So systems could be everything from creating behavioral competencies in a hiring process. So it's not just quote unquote fit, or like, are you kind of a good cultural match, or, did you come in through someone I trust and know in my network? Here are the things, the behaviors we'd like to see in our job. And do you have examples of ways in which you've demonstrated that, or can show the potential to demonstrate that? Like that would be a system that would potentially reduce bias in hiring. Or, I'm sitting here, I've got this like little habit tracker thing in front of me. My dentist, every visit, what does your dentist tell you to do? You need to floss more, right? And like, I know I don't need to be told that again, but honestly, like until I did a little habit tracker thing, I mean, I'm looking at 4 days in a row here on my habit tracker, because there is something so pleasing about the check mark and the satisfaction of that. And that's a system that's not necessarily ethically oriented, but it's an example of how systems are often more powerful than individual desires or intentions.
Yeah, so I've been teaching business ethics for the last several years, and we spend quite a bit of time on ethical culture and the importance of the formal
Mm,
and informal systems,
yeah,
because it is so easy to just, well, first of all, in the first part of the class is, I'm sure you're familiar with, of course, is we talk about, consequentialism versus deontology. And it's
yeah,
amazing how you can really justify almost anything using
I
consequentialist
know.
logic. It's so easy to just play with, the different weights uh,
Yeah,
for ethical behavior. And so I love this idea of, I talk about it in terms of an organizational culture. I love this idea of
yeah,
thinking about the systems in our personal lives to help us not rationalize the unethical decisions we might make.
yeah, I love that. Yeah, I mean, I think the idea is to not, we're all overloaded and overwhelmed and overtaxed. It's rarely going to work to just say, okay, try harder or slow down. I mean, I'm not saying it'll never work, but that's not a scalable solution over time or over people. So I think the 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 idea of seeing what systems can support us related to that, and it's going to seem like I'm contradicting myself, but I think these two things are connected. I've talked about psychological literacy being valuable, and that's just the idea of um, going from a mindset of assuming that because I care about being a good person, that means I am always acting that way. Like there's nothing in the field of psychology that would support that as a claim. Yet I think many of us, like there's a pretty widely held societal belief that that's how it works. So psychological literacy, just like we need financial literacy, to understand that how compounding works and how interest works, like just basic principles, some basic principles around how the human mind works, that it can be influenced by situations, that it's not always consistent, over time and over different circumstances, that social pressures are incredibly powerful. That kind of psychological literacy, I think, sets us up to be able to see the ways in which we sort of fluctuate in our behavior, and to be more open to the usefulness of systems and not be offended by them.
I really like that term. In my classes, I seem to spend at least one or two class periods just really focused on kind of the shortcomings of the brain and our perception, just to drive home the point that we all make mistakes and we're all influenced, often subconsciously, by our perceptions. So I like this idea of being psychologically literate, aware of
Yeah.
this, so that we can try to combat some of these biases.
Exactly. And another metaphor I've heard people use is like understanding that if you drink, it will affect your ability to drive. And knowing that doesn't mean that you're off the hook when you drive drunk. It means you're more responsible, not less responsible. Not like, oh, I couldn't control it. How could I control my reflexes when I was under the influence? It was like, well, you could control it by not being under the influence, or not getting behind the wheel when you're under the influence. And I think it's similar here. Like when you have the psychological literacy, you can be more accountable and take the appropriate actions.
Yeah, really interesting. And maybe last question, how did you get into this line of research?
I mean, the very short answer is I had advisors I really wanted to work with, and that was partially driven by their incredible mentorship skills. And so that's Max Bazerman and Mahzreen Banaji. Um, and that was the leading thing. But I also was very interested in their research, and so I think that was part of the unconscious draw towards them as mentors, was having always been sort of an insider outsider in my own life, because of identities I hold, and having always kind of cared a lot about how I show up as a good person, yet been kind of privately mystified as to why I don't always do it. And so, yeah, I think it was a combination of opportunity, mentorship, and genuine interest through personal lived experience.
Well, what a great approach and lesson to just strive to be a good person and raise good children and help other be good ethical people, all within this context of, we all mess up and we're all so prone and easily
Yeah,
misled. And so the importance of being psychologically literate, and then not just knowing, but trying to do and combat. So, well, Dolly,
yeah.
this is so great. It's so great to reconnect. Thank you for sharing your time and
Thank
us today. I
you.
look forward to sharing these with others.
What a legacy. Thank you for doing this.